Your press belongs to Lord Vane now. Duke Nathaniel Blackmere placed the brass workshop keys into his cousin's hand as calmly as if he were surrendering an unused stable. Around him, publishers, merchants, and government officials watched from beneath the vaulted ceiling of Blackmere Printing House. Miriam stared at the keys resting in Silas Vane's palm. She had purchased the first press with money protected by her marriage settlement. She had trained every apprentice, negotiated every contract, and transformed a failing workshop into one of London's most trusted printing houses. Nathaniel had not consulted her before taking it. The Crown has identified this establishment as the source of seditious material, he continued. Until the investigation is complete, Lord Vane will control its property, accounts, and workers. A murmur traveled through the room. Miriam forced her voice to remain steady. You told me this gathering concerned a government contract. It concerned something far more serious. Nathaniel lifted a folded sheet from the table. The proclamation bore Miriam's printer's mark, a small open book beneath a silver star. Its message called the king a tyrant and urged Londoners to rise against Parliament. Miriam felt the accusation moving through the crowd before Nathaniel spoke it. My wife's paper was used, he said. Her ink was used. Her mark appears beneath every copy. You believe I printed this? I believe the evidence. Silas Vane stepped beside him, dressed in immaculate gray, his expression arranged into one of reluctant concern. For months, Silas had promised Nathaniel the political support necessary to secure a cabinet appointment. Now Miriam understood the price of that promise. You inspected none of my records, she said. You questioned none of my workers. I gave you an opportunity to explain the missing paper 3 nights ago. You asked me during a dinner crowded with your political guests. When I requested an hour to examine the inventory, you refused. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. That had been the moment he could have chosen caution. Instead, he had treated her request as an attempt to delay him. Silas raised the keys. The apprentices should leave until we determine who can be trusted. They depend on their wages, Miriam said. They should have considered that before serving a traitor. One apprentice flinched. Another lowered his head. Nathaniel said nothing. That silence wounded Miriam more deeply than Silas's insult. Nathaniel knew these young people. He had eaten at their annual supper and praised their loyalty when the workshop's profits rescued one of his indebted estates. Yet he allowed guards to escort them toward the doors. Miriam turned to the proclamation. If emotion could not reach her husband, evidence might. Let me examine it. Nathaniel hesitated before handing it over. The paper was familiar. So was the deep black ink, mixed with the faintest trace of walnut oil to keep it fluid during winter. Whoever had produced the proclamation possessed materials from her locked storeroom. Then Miriam's thumb crossed the final line. Wet pigment marked her glove. Her pulse quickened. This was printed today. Silas gave a soft laugh. How convenient. The ink has formed a skin, but it has not cured beneath it. This sheet left a press less than an hour ago. Nathaniel glanced toward the guarded doors. Miriam stepped closer to him. Your men have kept me away from this building since sunrise. Every apprentice can confirm it. Unless one printed it for you beforehand, Silas replied. That is not what I said. This particular sheet was printed while I stood under guard inside Blackmere House. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Nathaniel's face. Miriam pressed the advantage. Lock the building. Search everyone here. Do not let Silas remove a single piece of type. Silas's pleasant expression hardened. Nathaniel saw it, but his eyes moved to the government officials watching him. To suspend the transfer now would mean admitting he had condemned his wife before examining the evidence. His ambition defeated his doubt. Lord Vane will conduct the search, he decided. Miriam looked at the man she had married 8 years earlier. You are giving control of the evidence to the person who gains my business if I am convicted. I am giving it to a man whose loyalty has never been questioned. Mine had never been questioned until you needed his influence. Nathaniel recoiled, as though she had struck him. Before he could answer, church bells erupted across London. One tower rang, then another. Within seconds the city thundered with alarm. The workshop doors flew open. A newsboy stumbled past the guards, his arms filled with freshly printed sheets. "Proclamation from the Crown," he shouted. "Parliament surrounded before midnight. All loyal citizens to Westminster." Silas snatched one page, but Miriam seized another. The same paper, the same ink, the same printer's mark. Yet this proclamation did not attack the king. It claimed royal authority and ordered Londoners to gather around Parliament, an action that could trap ministers inside and make an ordinary crowd appear to be an insurrection. Nathaniel read over Miriam's shoulder. The color drained from his face. At the bottom of the page stood his full name and title: Nathaniel Blackmere, Duke of Blackmere, Lord Commissioner for the Defense of the Realm. "I never authorized this," he whispered. Miriam examined the impression. His signature had been reproduced with alarming precision, but the final stroke was too straight. Nathaniel always lifted his pen when an old injury stiffened his wrist. Silas reached for the page. "We should destroy these before anyone else sees them." "No," Miriam said, pulling it away. "This is evidence." A second newsboy appeared outside, then a third. Hundreds of identical sheets were already passing from hand to hand in the street. Nathaniel turned sharply toward Silas. "How many presses are operating in this building?" Only Miriam would know. "I knew before you dismissed my workers," she replied. "Now I cannot tell you what has been brought inside." The bells continued ringing. From beyond the windows came the growing roar of people moving toward Westminster. Nathaniel finally looked at Miriam, not as the wife he had condemned, but as the only person in the room who understood the weapon being used against them. How long would it take to print this many copies? With one press, most of the night. With all four running, several hours. But this building was guarded. By men Silas appointed. Silas's face went still, then pounding shook the rear doors. A dismissed apprentice forced his way inside, blood running from a cut above his eye. It was 17-year-old Daniel Price, the youngest worker in Miriam's care. "They took Master Bell," he gasped. Men in government coats dragged him into a carriage. Miriam caught his shoulders. "Why?" Daniel pushed a narrow strip of paper into her ink-stained hand. "Because he found this hidden beneath the new type. It was a printer's proof, unfinished and never meant for public view. At its top appeared tomorrow's date. Beneath it stood Nathaniel's forged signature, and in letters large enough to be read from a gallows, it announced that the king was dead." Miriam folded the proof before Silas could seize it. Nathaniel locked the workshop doors. "No one leaves." "You have no authority to imprison government officials," Silas said. "I have enough authority to detain the man controlling the building where my signature is being forged." Silas's expression chilled. "Be careful, cousin. Suspicion will not save you from treason." Miriam turned to Daniel. "Who found the proof?" "Master Bell. He was checking a new case of type delivered yesterday. He told me to bring this to you if anything happened." "Who delivered it?" "Vane and Company." Everyone looked at Silas. "My warehouses supply half the printers in London," he replied. "That proves nothing." Miriam examined the narrow sheet. A row of tiny punctures ran along one edge. Master Bell had used their private counting method, one hole for each missing ream of paper. She counted 12. "Enough for thousands of proclamations." Nathaniel moved toward her. "What does it mean?" "Someone has been stealing supplies for weeks. The inventory you used against me was altered to conceal it." The rear windows shattered. A smoking object rolled across the floor. "Down!" Miriam shouted. Daniel pulled her behind the press as flames spread over the discarded paper. Workers rushed for water, but a second firebomb struck the storeroom door. Silas ran toward the front exit. Nathaniel caught his coat. "Where are you going?" "To summon help." "The streets are full of men wearing government coats," Miriam said. "The same kind who abducted Bell." For one charged moment, Nathaniel and Silas faced each other. Then Silas drove his elbow into Nathaniel's chest, tore free, and escaped through a side passage known only to senior staff. Nathaniel stared after him, shocked by a betrayal Miriam had warned him about. "Help me save the press," she ordered. He obeyed. Together they dragged the nearest ink barrels away from the flames. Daniel and the remaining apprentices formed a water line. Within minutes, smoke filled the room, but the main press survived. The storeroom did not. When the last flame died, Miriam entered the ruined chamber. Shelves had collapsed, Paper had turned to ash, and every ledger capable of proving the theft was gone, almost every ledger. Beneath a scorched floorboard, Miriam found a brass corner protruding from the wood. Nathaniel lifted the plank with an iron bar, revealing a locked dispatch box. It did not belong to her. The royal crest had been scratched away, but a dark stain remained around its handle. Blood. Nathaniel forced the lid open. Inside lay 12 invoices for paper delivered to an abandoned warehouse near Westminster, each authorized with Miriam's forged signature. Beneath them was a list of payments to men guarding Parliament that night. Nathaniel read the final document twice. "What is it?" Miriam asked. He handed it to her. It was an order for the arrest of Duchess Miriam Blackmere on charges of treason, prepared before the first proclamation had ever appeared. At the bottom was a space reserved for the Home Secretary's signature. A handwritten note filled the margin. "Obtain the Duke's testimony before 9. The wife must hang before she can identify the type." The workshop clock struck 7. Miriam had 2 hours. Miriam folded the arrest order and placed it inside her bodice. "We must reach the warehouse before they move the press," she said. Nathaniel blocked her path. "You are named in a royal warrant. It is not signed. It soon will be, because you accused me publicly. Your testimony gave Silas the foundation he needed." The words landed cleanly. Nathaniel did not deny them. Daniel emerged from the smoke carrying Master Bell's coat. "They dropped this when they took him." A smear of blue wax marked one sleeve. Miriam recognized it immediately. The same wax-sealed orders from the Office of Royal Works, whose wagons could pass government checkpoints without inspection. "They are using Crown transport," she said. "If we take your carriage, every guard will stop us." Nathaniel removed his formal coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Then we take a paper cart." For the first time that day, he acted without considering who might witness it. They left through the alley in a scorched delivery cart. Daniel remained behind to protect the surviving apprentices and hide copies of the evidence. As Miriam drove toward Westminster, the streets became increasingly crowded. Citizens carried the forged proclamation, believing the king had ordered them to surround Parliament. Soldiers formed barricades while agitators shouted that ministers were plotting against the crown. The false announcement of the king's death would turn that confusion into violence. Nathaniel watched the crowd with growing horror. "Silas knew my cabinet ambitions would make the signature believable. He also knew you would sacrifice me to protect them." Nathaniel lowered his gaze. Near Westminster Bridge, a line of blue-waxed government wagons waited beside an abandoned warehouse. Miriam stopped the cart in a narrow lane. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance. Nathaniel reached for the pistol beneath the seat. "If you fire, everyone inside will know we are here," Miriam warned. "Then how do we enter?" She pointed to a coal chute beneath the rear wall. "Paper warehouses require ventilation. Printing ink and lamp oil make them dangerously combustible." She had designed safer storage systems for years. Nathaniel had dismissed those details as workshop concerns. Now he followed her without question. They crawled through the chute and dropped behind stacks of stolen paper. A press hammered somewhere beyond the partition. Miriam peered through a gap. Master Bell was tied to a chair. One side of his face was bruised, but he was alive. Beside him, 2 printers produced copies announcing the king's death. A man in a government coat checked his watch. "At 8:30, distribute them," he ordered. "When the crowd panics, Vane's men will fire from the rooftops. The soldiers will believe Parliament is under attack." Nathaniel's hand tightened around his pistol. Miriam stopped him. "We need proof of who gave the order." The man placed a ledger on the table and opened it to a page bearing Silas's name. Miriam moved closer, but her skirt caught a stack of metal type. The pieces crashed across the floor. The press stopped. Guards turned toward the sound. Nathaniel stepped from hiding and fired into the ceiling. As the men scattered, Miriam ran to Master Bell and cut his ropes. "Can you walk?" "Yes, but take the ledger." She seized it just as Nathaniel shouted. More guards were entering through the front doors. Master Bell pointed toward the press. "There is another exit beneath the ink platform." Miriam pulled the lever he indicated. A trapdoor opened, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Nathaniel covered them as Miriam and Bell climbed down. Then he followed and slammed the door above them. They had barely entered the tunnel when footsteps approached from below. A lantern appeared around the bend. Silas Vane stepped into view with 4 armed men, and behind him stood the Home Secretary, holding the completed warrant for Miriam's arrest. The Home Secretary raised the warrant. "Duchess Blackmere, you are under arrest for treason." Silas smiled behind him. Miriam held up the stolen ledger. "Then arrest the man whose payments financed the attack on Parliament." The Home Secretary glanced at it but did not move. "Hand it over." "So you can destroy it?" Nathaniel stepped between them. "You knew the warrant was prepared before the proclamations appeared. I knew your wife was dangerous." "No," Miriam said. "You knew Nathaniel would condemn me without demanding proof." The secretary's silence confirmed it. Master Bell suddenly kicked the nearest lantern from a guard's hand. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. Nathaniel fired once. Men shouted and collided against the walls. Miriam caught Bell's arm and ran. Nathaniel followed the sound of their footsteps until pale moonlight appeared ahead. They climbed through a drainage opening beside the Thames, but a bullet struck the stone near Miriam's head. A second shot followed. Master Bell stumbled. Blood spread across his shoulder. Nathaniel lifted him into the abandoned paper cart. Miriam seized the reins, and they raced toward Parliament while Silas's men emerged from the tunnel behind them. The streets were almost impassable. Thousands of citizens crowded the approaches, waving forged proclamations and demanding answers. Soldiers lowered their bayonets. From surrounding rooftops, shadowed figures moved into position. Miriam saw the trap clearly. If Silas's men fired first, the soldiers would attack the crowd. By morning, the conspirators could claim that Nathaniel had organized an attempted coup and that his traitorous wife had printed the orders. "We cannot reach Parliament in time," Nathaniel said. "We do not need Parliament." She turned the cart toward Fleet Street. Miriam's former competitors might refuse to defend her, but every printer understood one command: stop the presses. They reached the largest newspaper office minutes before 8. Nathaniel carried Bell inside while Miriam rang the emergency bell used to warn of fire. Printers rushed into the courtyard. Miriam climbed onto the cart and held up the false death notice. "This proclamation is forged. Armed men are preparing to fire on the crowd at 8:30. If London believes the king is dead, hundreds will be killed." A publisher named Mr. Hale stared at her. "Why should we trust a woman accused of printing the first proclamation? Because the broken letter R on that page came from a type case supplied by Vane and Company. Inspect it yourselves." Several printers gathered around the sheet. Hale traced the damaged letter and looked up sharply. "I saw that same fracture in a government notice printed yesterday." Miriam handed him the ledger. "Then help me print the truth." Every press in the building began moving. Within minutes, apprentices carried correction notices into the streets. Church wardens were instructed to ring 3 short sequences, the recognized signal that the king remained alive. The crowd's panic began to weaken. Then shots cracked above Westminster. Nathaniel ran outside. One rooftop gunman had fired too early. Soldiers turned toward the sound instead of attacking the citizens. The trap was exposed, but Miriam's relief lasted only seconds. A black carriage stopped across the street. Silas stepped down, dragging Daniel Price beside him with a pistol pressed beneath the boy's jaw. "Bring me the ledger," Silas called, "or your apprentice dies before the next bell." Miriam stepped into the street with the ledger. Nathaniel caught her arm. "Silas will kill you both. He needs this book more than he needs me dead." Silas pressed the pistol harder against Daniel's throat. "Come alone." Miriam walked forward while printers watched from the windows. Behind her, the presses continued producing correction notices. "Release him first," she said. Silas laughed. "You are no longer in your workshop, Miriam. You cannot command anyone here. Yet your entire plan is failing because I gave one command." His smile vanished. Miriam raised the ledger over a burning street lamp. "Let Daniel go, or every name inside becomes ash." Silas shoved the boy toward her. Daniel stumbled across the road. Nathaniel pulled him to safety, but Silas lunged for the ledger. Miriam dropped it. As Silas bent to catch it, Nathaniel struck him. The pistol fired, shattering a window. Silas's driver whipped the horses forward, forcing Nathaniel aside. Silas climbed onto the moving carriage and escaped toward Westminster. Miriam recovered the ledger, but several pages had torn free beneath the wheels. Daniel pointed after the carriage. "He has Master Bell's printing plate." Bell examined the empty lining of his coat and cursed. The plate carried Miriam's mark and the damaged R connecting Vane's type to the forged proclamations. Without it, the ledger might be dismissed as another forgery. "Where would he take it?" Nathaniel asked. "To the Royal Foundry," Miriam replied. "He will melt it before Parliament examines the evidence." Nathaniel looked toward the armed streets. "I can delay him." "No, he expects you to chase him." She turned to Mr. Hale. "Send an apprentice through the newspaper tunnels to the foundry. Tell the foreman not to light the furnace." Hale dispatched his fastest boy. A carriage arrived moments later carrying Lord Justice Pembroke and 2 parliamentary officers. The Home Secretary had already sent word that Miriam was an armed fugitive who had incited the crowd. Nathaniel moved in front of her. "The accusation was mine," he said. "I gave Lord Vane control of her press and repeated his claims without verifying them." Pembroke studied him. "Are you withdrawing your testimony?" "I am admitting it was reckless and unsupported." The public confession cost Nathaniel the cabinet position he had pursued for years. Miriam saw him understand that before he finished speaking. Pembroke accepted the ledger but frowned at its torn pages. "This shows suspicious payments, not their purpose." A printer approached carrying one of the correction sheets. "The damaged R may prove where the proclamations originated. We need the original type or plate." A bell rang from the direction of the Royal Foundry. Once, twice, then continuously, the warning that its furnace had already been lit. Miriam turned toward Nathaniel. Silas had not gone there merely to destroy the plate. The foundry stored molds for royal seals, military badges, and official printing marks. With the crowd distracted, he could erase the evidence and steal enough authority to forge commands across the kingdom. Then an explosion shook the rooftops. A column of fire rose above the foundry. Daniel stared at the flames. "The apprentice we sent is still inside." Miriam gathered her skirts and ran. Miriam reached the Royal Foundry as workers poured through its gates. Flames climbed the western wall. Inside, heated metal burst from overturned molds, while smoke concealed the furnace floor. Nathaniel caught up with her. "You cannot go in." "My apprentice is inside. So is Silas." "That changes nothing." She wrapped a wet cloth around her face and entered. Nathaniel followed. They found the newspaper apprentice unconscious near a storage room. Nathaniel lifted the boy and carried him outside while Miriam searched through the smoke for the missing plate. A metallic blow sounded behind the furnace. Silas was forcing open a cabinet containing official seals. Beside him stood the Home Secretary, feeding documents into the fire. "You were supposed to destroy one plate," the Secretary snapped. "One plate will not protect us once Parliament sees the ledger." Miriam remained behind a pillar, listening. The Secretary threw another bundle into the flames. "Your gunman failed. The king lives, the crowd is dispersing, and Blackmere has withdrawn his testimony. Then we give Parliament a different traitor." Silas removed a royal seal from the cabinet. "Nathaniel's signature has already served us once." Miriam stepped from hiding. "It will not serve you again." Silas turned and drew his pistol. Before he could fire, Nathaniel struck him from the side. The weapon slid beneath the furnace platform. The Home Secretary fled toward the rear exit. Miriam pursued him, but he overturned a rack of burning molds between them. Molten metal splashed across the floor, cutting off her path. Silas drove Nathaniel against the furnace door. "You surrendered your wife's press because I promised you a seat in government," he hissed. "Do not pretend you were innocent." "I was not." Nathaniel struck him again. "I chose ambition over her word." Miriam found the missing printing plate on a work table. Its edge had begun to soften from the heat, but the printer's mark and fractured R remained visible. She wrapped it in leather and lifted it. Silas saw her. He abandoned Nathaniel and charged. Miriam pulled the furnace release lever. The iron door swung open between them, forcing Silas backward into a stack of empty molds. Nathaniel seized him. Outside, parliamentary officers had surrounded the building. Lord Justice Pembroke entered with armed guards. but the Home Secretary had escaped through the rear yard. Miriam handed Pembroke the damaged plate. "This links Vane's equipment to the proclamations." Master Bell, pale from blood loss, examined it beside him. "And I can testify that it arrived in a case supplied by his company." Silas struggled against the guards. "A printer's testimony against a lord?" "No," Pembroke replied. "A printer's evidence against a conspirator." They searched Silas and found the stolen royal seal inside his coat. The officers took him away. Nathaniel stood near Miriam, his face blackened by smoke. "It is over." "No," she said. "The Home Secretary still has the arrest warrant, and several pages are missing from the ledger." A foundry worker approached carrying a half-burned document recovered from the furnace. Only one paragraph remained legible. Miriam read it twice. It ordered soldiers stationed at Blackmere Castle to seize the estate at dawn and execute anyone accused of destroying crown property. The order bore Nathaniel's forged signature. At the bottom, a handwritten instruction named its first prisoner, the Duchess of Blackmere's 8-year-old daughter, Lady Sophia. Miriam's breath stopped. Sophia was 70 miles away, and dawn was only 6 hours distant. Miriam gripped the burned order. "Sophia is at Blackmere Castle with her governess." Nathaniel was already moving. "We take the fastest carriage. Silas's men will control the main road. Then we use the royal post route and change horses at every station." Lord Justice Pembroke examined the forged order. "I will send officers after you, but I cannot guarantee they will arrive first." Miriam looked at Nathaniel. "Your accusation made Sophia the daughter of a suspected traitor. The soldiers may believe they are protecting the crown." His face tightened. "I know what I have done." They left London with Master Bell's recovered plate and Pembroke's temporary order suspending Miriam's arrest. Daniel remained behind to help the printers preserve the evidence. At the second post station, the stable master refused them fresh horses. "Government orders," he said. "No animals for the Duke or Duchess of Blackmere." The Home Secretary had anticipated their escape. Nathaniel placed his signet ring on the counter. "Take this as payment for your best pair. That ring is worth more than the station. My daughter is worth more than the dukedom." Minutes later, they were moving again. Near midnight, Miriam noticed riders following them without lanterns. A shot struck the carriage. The driver collapsed across the box. Nathaniel seized the reins while Miriam pulled the wounded man inside. Another bullet shattered the rear window. "They want the plate," she said. Miriam opened the document case and removed it. Then she wrapped a heavy carriage tool in leather and threw the false bundle into the road. The pursuing riders stopped to recover it. Nathaniel drove on. They reached Blackmere Castle shortly before dawn. The gates stood open, and soldiers filled the courtyard. Sophia's governess knelt beside the fountain with her hands bound, but Sophia was nowhere in sight. Miriam jumped from the carriage. "Where is my daughter?" A captain stepped forward, holding the forged order. "Lady Sophia has been detained as security for your surrender." "By whose authority?" "The Duke's." Nathaniel dismounted and stood beside his wife. "That signature is false." The captain hesitated. Miriam showed him the recovered plate and Pembroke's suspension order. "Your command was printed by men who attempted to provoke an attack on Parliament." Before the captain could respond, a window opened high in the east tower. The Home Secretary appeared with Sophia held against him. "Mama!" the child cried. He pressed a pistol to her temple. "Bring the plate to the tower," he shouted. "If anyone follows, the Blackmere line loses its only heir." Nathaniel reached for his weapon. Miriam stopped him. "He wants me," she said, "and he still believes a printer is powerless without her press." She handed Nathaniel the genuine plate, then picked up the leather-wrapped carriage tool that the riders had returned after discovering the first deception. "Keep the soldiers out of sight," she whispered. "When the tower bell rings, enter." Miriam walked alone into the castle. As the tower door closed behind her, she heard the lock turn from the other side. Then Sophia screamed. Miriam climbed the tower stairs with the false plate beneath her cloak. Sophia's cries had stopped. The silence frightened her more. At the top, the Home Secretary waited inside the bell chamber. Sophia stood beside him with her wrists tied, trembling but unharmed. "Give me the plate," he ordered. "Release my daughter." When I possess the only evidence connecting Vane's press to the proclamations. Miriam placed the leather bundle on the floor and pushed it toward him. He bent to unwrap it. Sophia looked at her mother. Miriam tapped 2 fingers against her skirt, the signal they used during printing lessons when Sophia must step away from moving machinery. The girl understood. She threw herself to the floor just as the secretary discovered the iron tool. Miriam seized the bell rope and pulled. The great bell thundered above them. The secretary fired. The bullet struck the wooden frame as Miriam dragged Sophia behind it. Below, soldiers entered the tower. The secretary cut the bell rope with a knife, wrapped one end around Sophia's waist, and pulled her toward the open arch. 1 step closer and she falls. Nathaniel appeared at the top of the stairs but froze when he saw his daughter suspended beside the ledge. Miriam studied the mechanism overhead. The bell rope passed through a counterweighted wheel. If released correctly, it would pull upward rather than down. She edged toward the side lever. The secretary noticed. "Do not move. You have already lost," she said. "Silas is under arrest. The king lives, and Parliament has the ledger. Half a ledger proves nothing, but your words might." Master Bell's recovered plate was not the only evidence Nathaniel had brought. Beneath his coat, a small shorthand writer from the newspaper office had climbed the tower with the soldiers and was recording every word. Miriam needed the secretary to continue speaking. "You selected me because my mark could be copied," she said. "But why Nathaniel?" The secretary's mouth twisted. "Because your husband wanted power more than he trusted you. Vane offered him a cabinet seat, and he condemned you exactly as we expected." Nathaniel absorbed the confession without looking away. "And the king's death notice?" Miriam asked. "It would have emptied the palace, sealed Parliament, and placed emergency authority in our hands." The secretary tightened the rope around Sophia. Miriam pulled the side lever. The counterweight dropped. The rope snapped upward, lifting Sophia away from the ledge and wrenching the secretary off balance. Nathaniel lunged, caught his daughter, and dragged her to safety. The soldiers seized the Home Secretary. Miriam untied Sophia and held her close while the child sobbed into her shoulder. Nathaniel knelt beside them, but he did not reach for either of them. "I brought this upon you," he said, "both of you." Miriam met his eyes. "Yes." No forgiveness followed. At sunrise, Lord Justice Pembroke arrived with orders to escort them back to London. Parliament would convene an emergency hearing that afternoon. The conspiracy could now be exposed, but so would Nathaniel's role in enabling it, and Miriam would have to testify against her own husband before the entire nation. Parliament's emergency chamber was full by noon. Publishers, ministers, soldiers, and members of the aristocracy watched as Miriam entered carrying the recovered printing plate. Nathaniel followed several steps behind her, stripped of his ceremonial office and political privileges. Silas Vane and the Home Secretary stood under guard. Lord Justice Pembroke began with the forged proclamations. Master Bell identified the fractured R, Daniel described the hidden proof, and the shorthand writer repeated the secretary's confession from the tower. Then Miriam presented the payment ledger. Silas rose abruptly. Those records were forged by Duchess Blackmere. She controlled the press, the paper, and every witness employed there. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Miriam opened the ledger to its surviving pages. These entries were written with iron gall ink. "My workshop uses carbon ink for financial records because it does not corrode thin paper." She placed one of her genuine account books beside it. The handwriting was copied. The materials were not. Pembroke called for the missing pages. An officer reported that they had not been recovered. Without them, the surviving entries connected Silas to the stolen supplies, but not directly to the rooftop gunman or the plan to seize Parliament. Then Nathaniel stepped forward. "I can supply the connection." He handed Pembroke a private correspondence book bearing his ducal seal. Months earlier, Silas had asked Nathaniel to authorize additional security for a government gathering. Nathaniel had signed the request without examining the attached list of men. Those same names appeared among the captured gunmen. "You knew nothing of their purpose?" Pembroke asked. "No, but my ignorance was chosen. My wife warned me that Vane was removing paper, replacing guards, and interfering with her accounts. I dismissed her objections because I wanted the appointment he promised. The admission destroyed his defense. It also completed Miriam's evidence chain. Pembroke turned to Silas. You obtained armed men through the Duke's authorization, supplies through the Duchess's stolen inventory, and access to official seals through the Home Secretary. Silas's confidence finally broke. The guards removed him as the chamber erupted. The Home Secretary was charged with treason, abduction, attempted murder, and abuse of royal authority. Silas faced the same charges, along with conspiracy and forgery, but Nathaniel remained before Parliament. You enabled this scheme, Pembroke said. Your signature armed the conspirators, and your unsupported accusation placed an innocent woman beneath the threat of execution. Nathaniel looked toward Miriam. I accept whatever judgment follows. Before sentence could be discussed, Miriam requested permission to speak. My name must be cleared publicly, she said. My workers must receive compensation. My press must be returned free of my husband's control, and every proclamation accusing me must be formally withdrawn. Pembroke nodded. Parliament will grant those conditions, and my daughter's guardianship and settlement must be secured against any decision the Duke may make in anger, ambition, or fear. Nathaniel's face tightened with pain, but he answered first, I consent. Miriam had recovered her name, her livelihood, and Sophia's security. Yet one question remained beyond Parliament's authority. That evening, Nathaniel entered the restored printing house and placed the brass keys on Miriam's desk. Beside them lay a signed deed transferring the entire business to her independent trustees. I have repaired what the law permits me to repair, he said. Now you must decide what remains of our marriage. Miriam looked at the keys, then at the man who had once taken them from her before a crowd. Her answer would come the following morning, when Nathaniel was required to confess his betrayal publicly from the same steps where he had condemned her. By 10 the next morning, the steps of Blackmere Printing House were crowded. The same publishers, officials, and merchants who had witnessed Miriam's humiliation now gathered to hear Nathaniel speak. Behind him hung a royal notice declaring Duchess Miriam Blackmere innocent of every accusation. Nathaniel carried no prepared defense. I accused my wife of treason without examining the evidence, he began. I dismissed her warnings because Lord Vane offered me political power. I surrendered her property, silenced her workers, and allowed her reputation to be destroyed in public. No one moved. Others forged the proclamations, planned the attack on Parliament, and threatened our daughter. But they succeeded. Because I gave them authority, I refused to give my wife, the person who had earned my trust. He announced that his cabinet candidacy had been withdrawn permanently. He would also relinquish control of 2 profitable estates, placing their income into independent trusts for Miriam, Sophia, and the dismissed apprentices. Then he faced his wife. I cannot ask the woman I condemned to reward me because I finally admitted the truth. Miriam ascended the steps. Nathaniel opened his hand. The brass workshop keys lay across his palm, exactly as they had when he gave them to Silas. This time, he did not decide their destination. Miriam took them. The crowd applauded, but she raised one hand until the sound faded. My innocence has been established, she said. Every apprentice will be reinstated with full back pay. Master Bell will become a partner, and this printing house will remain beyond the control of any husband, title, or political office. Nathaniel lowered his head. Miriam continued, The law may still call us husband and wife, but trust does not return with a deed or an apology. Sophia and I will reside at Rosemere House, under the protection of my settlement. Pain crossed Nathaniel's face, but he did not protest. May I write to her? He asked quietly. You may write. She will decide when she wishes to answer. And you? I need a life in which my safety does not depend upon whether you believe me. Nathaniel accepted her judgment. Over the following months, the conspirators faced trial. The former Home Secretary was convicted of treason, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Silas Vane lost his properties and political protections before receiving a long prison sentence. Their accomplices were dismissed, prosecuted, or permanently barred from government service. Nathaniel testified against them without minimizing his own responsibility. Parliament formally censured him, removed him from public office, and suspended his right to hold a government appointment. He sold his London residence to fund the apprentices' compensation. He also published his confession in every newspaper that had carried Miriam's alleged guilt. But he never asked those actions to purchase forgiveness. At Rosemere House, Sophia recovered slowly. Nathaniel visited only when invited, and Miriam never left them alone until her daughter felt safe. Some days Sophia ran to meet him. On others, she refused to leave the nursery. He learned to accept both responses. Miriam returned to her press. Her first independent publication exposed how forged documents had nearly turned London against itself. It explained the stolen paper, copied mark, fractured type, false signatures, armed provocateurs, and corrupted officials who had exploited a duke's ambition. The final page carried no ducal crest, only Miriam's open book beneath its silver star. 1 year after the hearing, Nathaniel came to the workshop carrying a letter rather than an order. He had spent the year managing his remaining estate, paying his obligations, and living outside public life. "I will not ask you to return," he said. "I only wanted you to know that I understand why you left." Miriam studied him across the press. She could see genuine change, but change did not erase consequence. Nathaniel might someday become a man she could trust again. That possibility did not require her to surrender the freedom she had fought to regain. "You may have supper with Sophia on Sunday," she said, "at Rosemere, 6 o'clock. Hope entered his eyes, restrained by humility. "And us?" "There is no us today." Nathaniel bowed. "Then I will not demand tomorrow." After he left, Miriam approached the main press. Daniel waited beside the lever while Master Bell examined the fresh paper. "Ready, Your Grace?" Daniel asked. Miriam looked toward the brass keys hanging above her desk. Once Nathaniel had placed them in another man's hand and declared her powerless. Now the entire building waited for her command. "Print," she said. The press descended, and Miriam's name appeared on the first page.